Good evening, visitors, and welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Dennis Stockman, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Young. This week marks the 115th anniversary of the end of the Boer War in South Africa. The Boer War began in October 1899 after two Boer republics, the Orange Free State and Transvaal, fearing British colonial ambitions, invaded the British-held colonies of Natal and Cape Colony. The British suffered a series of successive heavy defeats, which came known as Black Week. The Australian colonies were quick to offer troops to Britain, and the first Australian contingents began arriving in South Africa in December 1899, too late to take part in the actions of Black Week. In February 1900, Queensland and New South Wales troops took part of the relief of Kimberley. The Boer armies became fragmented during 1900 after suffering a series of defeats. The Boers continued to operate in groups of highly mobile commandos which fought a guerrilla war against the British and their allies. The mobile war suited the Australians, who predominantly fought on mounted units, though their horses suffered terribly in the harsh conditions of the veldt. Australians took part in many iconic battles during the Boer War, such as Diamond Hill, Eland's River, and Wilman's Crust. After the Federation of Australia, on the 1st of January 1901, the new nation raised 8 battalions of mounted infantrymen for service in South Africa. However, only the first 2 battalions arrived in time to see service. The war came to an end on the 31st of May 1902, when the Boer republics signed the Treaty of Vereeniging in Pretoria. Over 16,000 Australians served in South Africa in Australian contingents. Others served with the British or South African units, and a small number fought for the Boers. Conditions in South Africa were particularly trying. Of Australia's 588 fatal casualties, 282 were killed in action or died of wounds. 286 died from disease, and another 38 died due to accidents or from other unknown causes. Today we remember all those who died as a result of their service during the Boer War and whose names are recorded here on the Roll of Honour. We will shortly recall the story of one of those casualties, Lieutenant Stanley Spencer Reid. On Wednesday, a dedication ceremony will take place on Anzac Parade for Australia's first National Boer War Memorial. We warmly welcome the members of the Boer War Memorial Committee and the South African Military Veterans Organisation of Australasia, as well as descendants of those who were involved in the Boer War. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial. Please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is earth by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts, of beauty rich and rare. In
The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forests. Wreath or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Stanley Spencer Reid. Stanley Reid was born on the 12th of July 1872 in Swan, Victoria, and was the oldest of 7 children of Civil and Reverend John Bentley Reid. A respected minister of the Presbyterian Church, Stanley was educated at Scotch College in Melbourne and went on to study arts at Melbourne University. During his time there, he was voted one of the best all-round athletes of his time. He played football and cricket, as well as competing in running, boxing, shooting and riding. Following his university education, he decided to follow his father by entering the ministry and went to Ormond College, graduating from his theological course in October 1898. His first church was St George's Presbyterian Church in Boulder, Western Australia, where he began working in December 1898. He was considered a great favourite with his own congregation and with people of no denomination. When the call for Australian contingents to the Boer War went out in 1899, Stanley Reid attempted to enlist as a chaplain. He did not succeed in his attempt and instead enlisted as a trooper in the 2nd West Australian Mounted Infantry. At his farewell function in Boulder, he said he had got over the youthful glamour of war, but he was prepared to take his part in what was in store for him. He hoped they would be able to say they had given a farewell to a man who had taken his part for the British Empire. He served in South Africa for most of 1900, mostly patrolling for small groups of Boers. A few weeks after he arrived, he wrote to home to say, "The war seems to be nearly over, and our work seems to be to patrol the country and keep rebels from rising. My face is in a very bad state from sunburn." In August, the West Australians participated in a general advance from Pretoria. Trooper Reid and another man went missing for about 16 days, having dropped out of the column and become lost trying to rejoin it. According to Reid's account, they stumbled onto a Boer stronghold in a gorge and were nearly trapped, but managed to escape. Reid was noted to be an excellent soldier, and his comrades said that he simply did not know what fear was. His bravery was of a reckless, dashing kind. He was mentioned in dispatches by Kitchener for his courage. Reid returned to Australia with his contingent towards the end of 1900. He made a quick visit to Boulder, where he was welcomed by the Mayor and councillors and a number of prominent residents of the town. Shortly afterwards, he was offered a commission, and by early 1901, he was back in South Africa, this time with the 6th West Australian Mounted Infantry. His brother, Francis, a doctor, had also offered his services and was nearby. In June of that year, the 5th and 6th West Australian Mounted Infantry left their camp near Middleburg and advanced 2.5 miles towards the Boer positions. Stanley took some men forward to see what was over the skyline, leaving the bulk of his force about 3 miles behind. Those left behind heard a heavy burst of continuous fire, and Reid and his men disappeared from view. As the men watched, a group of Boers chased 2 of Reid's men back over a ridge. They were driven back, and Reid and his group were found. 2 men were dead and 3 were wounded, including Lieutenant Stanley Reid, who had been shot through the stomach. Reid was made as comfortable as possible and was eventually taken back to camp by an ambulance wagon. His brother stayed near him the whole time, but he and the other surgeons in the camp agreed Stanley's case was hopeless. He died at 5 a.m. on the 29th of June 1901, with his brother by his side. Francis later wrote, "The men of the contingent fairly worshipped him and are very cut up over his death. Poor Stanley's grave is the best I have seen in South Africa." Stanley Spencer Reid was 29 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among 605 Australians who lost their lives in the Boer War. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Stanley Spencer Reid, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall not grow old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, we shall remember them.
We will remember them.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they'll be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. Thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and good evening.